Good morning, everyone. Today is time period 1, day 5. Today and the next class period, we'll be talking about Egypt. I'm going to get right into it today. You'll notice I don't have the board behind me. Nobody can see it anyway, so I'm going to do it a little more casually today. Then I'm going to include the notes at the bottom of the screen like we have been doing. I'm also going to try and go a little bit slower today just so we can kind of understand as we're going. But my goal is to keep the video short. So, done with the introduction. Let's go ahead and get started. So today, we're talking all about Egypt. We're going to divide Egypt into two parts. If you have your map, we're going to be doing mapping of Africa. You know where Egypt's at. More importantly, you know where the Nile is at. The Nile is going to be the dividing point for Egypt. The Nile River, unlike most rivers, is going to flow from south to north. So it's almost like it's flowing backwards, if you will. Where it starts at in the south and the bottom part is actually called the Upper Egypt. I know, just stick with me. So imagine it flowing uphill and going up towards the Mediterranean. It actually flows into the Mediterranean, at which point in time that is called Lower Egypt. As it approaches the Mediterranean, it goes into what's called a delta, or basically a big old pool of water that spreads out all over the place. At that point, right where the river itself hits the delta area, that's where you're going to find the major cities. That's where you're going to find the pyramids are going to be built at. All the big population centers are going to be in those areas. So Egypt itself, from the time of Mesopotamia, from the time that everybody's kind of making their way out of the Middle East, what ends up starting to happen is people are just kind of spreading over the place and everybody's kind of doing their own thing. It's going to take a little bit, but eventually what starts to happen, unlike with Hammurabi, what's going to develop is going to be a dynasty. With Hammurabi, he was an emperor, he controlled over all the lands that he conquered, but when he died, there was nobody else. There was a power struggle for his territories, and all the territory that he had developed broke apart. In Egypt, that was not going to be the case. They have a strong ruler that's going to come about named Menes. Menes is going to be a pretty dominant ruler for Egypt, but when he dies, his family member, his son, is going to take over. In Egypt, eventually they're going to start calling these things pharaohs. That's the word I'm going to use to kind of describe the leaders of Egypt. With Egypt, we're going to divide it into three parts. You're going to read about this in the reading station today. I think maybe you're going to do a little bit of something on it with the research group too. We'll get to that. So I'm very quickly going to talk about the three parts, starting with Old Egypt, or what we call the Old Kingdom. That's roughly 2700 BC to 2200 BC. So about 4,700 years ago to 4,200 years ago. Still a very long time ago. When we talk about these time periods, this is around the same time as Hammurabi, slightly after his time, but generally speaking. Large temples are being built. It's a time of prosperity. Populations are growing up, mostly because of farming. The kings, the rulers of Egypt, the pharaohs, are going to take on like godlike personalities. They are going to be one with God. So religion, government, all kind of intermingles there. The pharaoh is kind of revered amongst the people. They is like the highest being that could ever be possible. And because of this, whenever they died, they did pretty elaborate stuff with their bodies. The pyramids in Egypt, we're going to look at pictures of back in the research group. Those pyramids back there are built because of these pharaohs. When they died, the largest of the pyramid would be built for the pharaoh, and then all the smaller pyramids around the complex would be built for the pharaoh's family. There'd even be some places in there for the pharaohs what they call officials, these the people that work for the pharaoh or whatever. So ultimately, what you end up with is like a small city of pyramids. That was the whole point, of that the pharaoh would not be alone; that he would be surrounded by all these people. And then when they died, when the family members died, they also would mummify the bodies, which we're going to read a little bit more about, I think, in the reading group. You'll see the whole process that they go through. I think it's 60, 70 days, something like that. It actually took them to prepare the body for burial, but once they did, the body would be made to last for generations. We're also going to look at pictures of mummies that they have on display at the St. Louis Art Museum. So very cool. So following the death of that dynasty, the ending of the Menes dynasty, Egypt goes into like a period of turmoil for about 100, 150 years, something like that. They're being invaded by outside forces, but within Egypt, there's still this like strong unity, this strong desire to kind of unify everything, get them back to normal. Enter the Middle Kingdom. We're not going to talk a lot about the Middle Kingdom, except for that it is a big time of prosperity, mostly for two reasons. One, agriculture becomes huge. when we think about deltas, think about the Nile River flowing towards the Mediterranean. I want you to think about the Mississippi flowing towards the Gulf of Mexico. When you get down into Louisiana, you get that bayou, that delta area that exists. That's what Egypt was like. So it's under this middle period where they get the idea of, hey, let's get rid of all that swamp water, let's get that out of there. And that's actually really solid, good farmland. It worked. They increased their crop production by about 10%, and then ultimately going to increase their population with that. So their population grows, the amount of surplus food they have grows, which ultimately is going to help out the trade a lot. They're going to connect the Mediterranean and the Red Sea through a canal, so they're going to be able to travel basically through the entire country of Egypt as they knew it to get their goods moving back and forth between Mesopotamia and where Egypt is at. So lots of good things happening in that Middle Kingdom, but it doesn't last too long. That's from about 2050 BC to about 1652 BC. So they're going to have probably about a 400-year run, something like that. And then bad news is going to happen. They're going to start being invaded all over the place. This is around the time where, if you've heard of the Battle of Troy, that kind of stuff is going to start popping up. You're going to see a lot of invaders amongst the Greek islands, just to the north of Egypt, crossing the Mediterranean and invading into Egypt. Also from Mesopotamia, a lot of the old Sumerians are going to come in. One of the things the Sumerians are doing that the Egyptians are not doing yet is working with metals, specifically bronze, and they mastered the art of using the chariot as a war machine. They're able to come in and literally roll through the Egyptians. The Egyptians are out there fighting with donkeys and sticks, and the Sumerians come through with basically metal chariots and are able to literally run them over. The Sumerians are going to rule Egypt for a pretty good while, for probably at least, I don't know, close to 100 years or so, something like that. Eventually the Egyptians do come back up, new pharaohs do come into power, and that's when they really see their big expansion. In Egypt during what they call the New Kingdom, from about 1567 up to about 1085, so again, roughly about a 500-year span, they're going to see some big-time expansion of the Egyptian kingdoms. The Egyptian Empire is going to build all throughout what was Samaria and Mesopotamia, conquer all that, make its way eastward into Afghanistan, Pakistan, and staying just to the north of India. And that's going to take place all the way up until the time of Alexander the Great and the Macedonians, who are going to come in and conquer Egypt, along with Persia and several other places along the way. All right, I am just about finished with the video. I'm seeing that I'm staying just under my 8-minute mark, which is fantastic. It's exactly where I needed to be. I know we went very fast today. I'm going to build in notes down here at the bottom as we've gone, so hopefully you've gotten those. You are going to get a lot of good stuff in your reading today. You're also going to get a lot of good stuff done in your mapping today, I know. Hopefully you guys learned something. Hopefully you've been paying attention and not zoning out. We are going to try and do a live lecture at some point in time, either this week or next week. So be looking for that as well. I've heard your concerns. I've listened to them. And we're going to try and work that out for those of you who would rather have a live lecture. All right, have a good rest of your day, everybody. Have hopefully you had a good weekend. Have a good week in front of you. Let us know if you have any questions. And that's it.